もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo needs me free.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
Okay, that looks like it'll fit, but actually I'd like to move the filter back here a bit, so I'm going to maybe take about an inch off of there and see what happens. Yep, it's time for episode 32 of my 76 Mazda Cosmo restoration, and I think this time we're going to do something just a little bit quicker and easier than the Vintage Air installation. I'm going to build me an Airbox. Looks like I'm going to have to take at least an inch off of this thing in order to position the filter roughly where I want it. So this tape is, I think, 3/4 inch. I'll use it to mark my cutting line, and that way I can make several cuts and take a little off at a time, as opposed to ruining this $80 silicone bend. Stuff's hard to cut. I ended up trimming off a little over 2 inches, but that puts the filter about where I want it. Now I can start building a box. About 8 1/4 by, call it 9 inches. 9 by 8 1/4. Need a new marker. That marks about the height of the hole I need to cut to pass through the filter. Of course, both the filter and silicone elbow will mount to this piece of 3-inch tubing. I do not have a 3-inch wall saw, but what I do have is the circle cutting attachment for my Dremel and a routing bit. We'll see how well this works. It's the first time I've ever used it. The next piece will be the only other straight piece, which is the frontmost side. Before I start welding on the side, I better finish weld this, because I bet this whole panel's going to warp quite a lot, so I'm going to have to straighten it out first. It's going to be very difficult to do if there's a side on it. Unsurprisingly, it warped quite a bit. Obviously, if I had some jigging, you know, I would have avoided that, but it will require just as much effort to make a welding jig for a one-off part as it would to just spend 5 minutes in the vise manually de-warping it. And it'll never be perfect again, but it's an airbox. Actually, this is really close at that point, so. This 90-degree vise is one of my favorite welding accessories ever. It makes making any kind of 90-degree angle very, very, very easy. So you just put the pieces in, tighten up the vise a little, tap things into place, and crank her down, and she's ready to weld while maintaining that perfect 90-degree angle. Next piece is going to be the bottom, but since it needs a little bit of trimming to fit over the wheel well, and I actually have to make a big hole in it so that it can actually suck air, I'm just going to tape it in place for now. That should hold it for the time being and give it a little rigidity to the structure. What I'll just do is make a mark out here and a mark out here, and we'll cut this whole area here out. I'm planning to pull cold air from the inner fender, so I'll need to make a hole through the bottom of the airbox. This piece of 4-inch tubing will locate my hole roughly about there. That avoids some of the ribs on the car. Many times when I need to find the center of a circle, I just cheat and I draw the circle out in CAD, stick some crosshairs in the center, and then print it out, actual size. I'll just take my awesome circle template. It doesn't have to be millimeter precise here. Center punch. One center. I don't have a 4-inch hole saw either. Okay, I'm going to position that as close as I can guess to where it's actually going to go, and then mark out a rough circle to where gonna have to make a big hole. Oh, you know it's gonna be a good day when you get to bust out the 4.5-inch hole saw. And this will be the cold air source for the airbox, and once I have the bumper and fenders in place, I'll probably put a curved snorkel to draw air from behind the bumper. Now at this point, the airbox can come out of the car, and all the future assembly can take place on the bench. Let that cool down a bit because she's more than a little hot. Hopefully the clamp stopped it from warping too badly. Seemed to stay flat enough. That panel is now tacked on, and the rest of this box can just be built now on the bench. Going to need to make a slight bend right about there. Okay, the last side was just the same as the other one, just a slightly different bend. Now it's tacked on. So, the airbox is all tacked together. Before I fully weld this thing up, I'm going to trace and cut out the top, just because I expect it to warp some when doing the finish welding, and I will use the top, the shape of the top, to straighten it back out. Now that the top is cut, it's obvious that I have made a really nice birdhouse. Now it's simply a matter of welding the whole thing up. I can only do about an inch at a time because this material is very thin, and any more and it would start to warp. So an inch here, an inch there. All done. I gotta say, That's about 2 hours worth of welding in this thing. Of course, I need to be able to bolt the top on, so I'm going to weld some tabs into each corner. Of course, these are aluminum, so they're a pain in the butt to support. The solution is a little bit of aluminum angle and some creative work with the vice grips. Another one to hold it in place. Two more of those to do off camera. This one's just a little bit different because it's on the corner, so I just used a piece of 1/8 inch angle cut to about 1 inch long to match the other one. I'll just use nutserts to add some threads so that the top can be bolted down. Well, that completes the basic airbox. The only thing remaining is to mount it to the car. These will be the mounting brackets for the front of the airbox. It's taken over an hour of subtly tweaking the position of this airbox to get it in the right spot. The problem is that nothing it seems to line up with is actually straight. So it just had to look reasonably good from various angles of view so that when you look at the engine bay, you don't immediately say, "Whoa, the airbox isn't straight." I mean, it's not straight, but it's not straight to match all the not straightness of everything else that's around it that's not straight. Got that straight? Now I've placed my mounts where they need to go, lacking some type of aluminum magnet, which seriously, my welding store has been out of stock of for a long time. The best I can do is just mark the positions . The box is back into place and basically self-supporting. I'll just make a few marks now for the mounting holes. And might as well weld on these mounts. We'll just weld some nuts to the underside. a bit of a trick to get this thing in here now, but it doesn't fit. There we go. So we'll just bolt it in place using the new front brackets and holes. Should basically be self-supporting at that point. And then just make the two rear mounting brackets. I've been using this little strap of metal bolted to one of the cover mounting tabs to locate the airbox against this edge of the car. And because the brackets that I welded on have a little bit of spring onto them, it just has to hold a little bit of tension, put the airbox where it needs to go. Okay, just locate my bolt hole up there. So this should just bolt right in using the factory hole. And I should be able to weld that in place on the car. Not bad for upside down. The last mount will be made of this 1 3/8" aluminum angle, and it's going to tuck in just underneath the horizontal cowl there at the rad support. It's going to be well hidden and a bit awkward to install. It just needs to be bent down ever so slightly to match the angle of the cowl. Should do it. There's absolutely zero space to show the procedure on camera, but this is how the mount will end up. Unlike the other brackets that I just welded onto the airbox, this one bolts into place. The reason is because if I had welded it into place, I could never actually get the airbox into the car. So for the last time, the airbox gets installed. Then the last bracket is bolted on. This elbow at this point is pretty hard to install because there's no more flex in the location of the airbox. So it kind of just needs to be pushed into place, which of course I can do in 5 seconds when the camera's not on. God, it's like trying to get into the pants of a nun. There we go. The filter is a very tight fit. Snug it down a little. The last piece to be installed is the cover. And that's it. The Airbox is about as done as Rob Ford's mayoral career. While I was working on the Airbox, I kept looking at this little area on the other side of the car, and I thought, wow, you know, that looks like a perfect spot for the coolant recovery bottle. So I measured it, and I grabbed some 3-inch square tubing. Look at that. Looks like it'll be a perfect fit. So since I'm in an aluminum fabbing mode, let's do the coolant bottle as well. 9 1/4 inches is the size. The pieces I just cut will be the end caps for the coolant recovery bottle. So we'll just clamp it down and tack it in place. Looks like a perfect fit. Now I'll just weld these end caps on. Oops. Let's try that again. I had to shorten my relay bracket ever so slightly for clearance. Here's hoping that I don't need to mount any more relays. I cut these 2 little bits of angle, which will become the mounting brackets, and I think will be about there. Looks about right. So work. Okay, just knock the top of the welds down so it still sits flat. That's basically how it's going to fit. Just need to drill mounting holes. Good. Mark. And drill, and nutsert. Almost like it's made to fit in that exact spot. For the fill cap, I'm just going to use this Billet Specialties cap and bung. And I just happen to have a piece of tubing to match that already has a 45-degree angle on it, which will work perfectly. I just have to shorten it by about 3 inches. Perfect. I don't often use the big-ass unibit. weld this thing on. And the last bit to be installed is a -4 weld bung at the bottom for the coolant to flow through. That is a welded coolant recovery tank. And the last task is to drill a tiny hole through the cap as a vent. That's a 1/16 drill bit. After about 20 minutes of cooling, the coolant recovery tank is done. Cap's on, so we're done. And I guess that means we've reached the end of episode 32. That was a lot of aluminum fab, so I hope you enjoyed it. What's up for the next episode? I don't know. Once again, I could go about a million different directions, but I'm thinking maybe intercooler?